All right, let's just dive right into this, because it is an incredible historical anomaly. For over a century, the accepted golden rule of modern economics has been pretty straightforward. If you want to build a truly wealthy first world nation, you absolutely need capitalism. End of story, right? Well, what if there was an exception? What if a nation somehow achieved first world wealth using a completely alternative economic model? Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to visually dissect exactly how Slovenia pulled this off and got rich without capitalism.
To really grasp the scale of this achievement, we need to set the scene. Back in the late 1980s, the global baseline to be considered a rich country was a GDP of around $7,600 per capita. But get this, the average Slovenian was generating over $10,000 per capita. That means they were actually producing slightly more than the average person in established capitalist nations like Ireland or Spain at the time, and they did the whole thing without ever adopting a capitalist system. Literally, no way, right?
So, here is how we're going to unpack this whole paradox today. We'll start with 1. Rich without capitalism. 2. Failing the Soviet model. 3. Decentralization and worker councils. 4. Free market socialism. 5. Why Slovenia succeeded. And finally, 6. The end of an era.
Okay, part 1. Rich without capitalism and the Austro-Hungarian advantage. Slovenia's story actually kicks off with a massive geographical lucky break. Because they were the Austro-Hungarian Empire's only direct access to the sea, they weren't just treated like some distant, forgotten colony. Instead, they got heavy early investments in infrastructure and self-governance. And that gave them a vital head start when it came to managing a complex economy.
But things got rocky. After World War I, Slovenia gained independence and joined Yugoslavia, which was, unfortunately, the third poorest country in all of Europe. It was a really rough stretch. They were totally trapped, relying on these volatile agricultural exports through the 1920s. Then they got completely frozen by the Great Depression in the 30s, and then came the devastating German invasion in 1941.
Which brings us to part 2, failing the Soviet model and the command economy era. After World War II, Yugoslavia emerged as a newly communist nation. They decided to adopt this incredibly strict, centralized system where the government commanded absolutely everything. We're talking what was produced, exactly how factories made it, down to what it cost on the store shelves.
And honestly, it was a spectacular failure. These centralized 5-year plans just did not work. If a factory failed to meet its quota, the government would literally just give it more money. They were actively rewarding inefficiency. Plus, if a worker on the floor had a brilliant idea to speed things up, they had to send it to planners in the capital, which took forever. And without any competition, product quality just tanked. Consumers were stuck buying terrible products because, let's face it, a bad soup spoon is still better than eating soup with your hands.
All right, part 3. Decentralization and worker councils, sparked by the 1948 split. Everything changed when Yugoslavia broke away from the Soviet Union. Because they were largely liberated by their own forces, they didn't have a massive Soviet army occupying them. This gave them the ultimate freedom to just abandon that failing command economy entirely and invent a brand new system from scratch, something that would later be called Titoism.
This was a massive pivot. They solved all those central planning headaches through radical decentralization. Under this new Yugoslav socialism, businesses were actually forced to compete with one another on an open market. And here is the kicker. They were allowed to earn a profit, and that profit was shared directly among the employees.
The core philosophy here was beautifully simple. Let the workers run the businesses themselves. Now, I won't sugarcoat it, it was a brutal transition at first. Initially, 1.5 million Yugoslavs lost their jobs as those bloated, inefficient state businesses completely collapsed when faced with actual competition. But in the long run, it completely empowered the people standing right there on the factory floor to make rapid, smart decisions without waiting for some bureaucrat's stamp of approval.
And the result? An absolutely astonishing 30-year economic boom, averaging a whopping 6% annual economic growth. That is massive. They were easily outpacing developing capitalist nations like South Africa at the time. Plus, because the government still kept a tight grip on overall investment levels across industries, they completely avoided those massive boom-and-bust housing or stock market recessions that just relentlessly plague modern capitalist economies.
Within Yugoslavia, Slovenia had this exceptionally uncorrupt government that really drove this growth through some incredibly smart investments. A perfect example is the port of Koper in 1957. They transformed it into this massive neutral trade hub. Because Yugoslavia was politically neutral, Slovenia could buy cheap basic materials from the capitalist West, process them, and sell them right to the communist East. They basically played the ultimate highly lucrative middleman between two worlds that absolutely refused to trade directly with each other.
Moving right along to part 4, free market socialism and the mechanics of Titoism. This is where the nuts and bolts get really fascinating, because this system was quite literally a mashup of two totally different economic philosophies.
The whole economy rested on 3 main pillars. First, you had a free market, meaning consumer demand, not arbitrary government quotas, actually dictated what got produced. Second, self-management, which literally meant the workers controlled the companies. And third, socialism, where the state still maintained strict control over basic resources like water, while providing massive social programs like free healthcare and free education for everyone.
So you might be wondering, how does a company actually run without a traditional boss? Well, every business was self-managed through 4 distinct groups. The Workers' Council made the day-to-day plans, the managers implemented them, social groups like unions oversaw everything to prevent corruption, and the government acted as the final tiebreaker. And the genius of this? Just the threat of the government stepping in to force a decision was almost always enough to make the workers and managers sit down, compromise, and figure it out themselves.
Then, in 1965, something crazy happened. The Yugoslav government actually asked its people what kind of socialism they wanted. And the people overwhelmingly said open borders. So, they opened them up. This triggered a massive influx of Western tourists driving straight through Slovenia. More importantly, it allowed Slovenians to cross borders, work in Italy and Austria, and send all that high-value foreign currency straight back home.
This open border policy was an absolute game changer economically. Think about trying to make stainless steel. Most communist countries tried to stubbornly make everything entirely inside their closed borders. But if you're trying to make stainless steel and your country naturally lacks chromium, your entire industrial supply chain immediately falls apart. You simply can't build machines that last.
But by letting people take casual shopping trips across the border to Italy and Austria for things like tools and food, Slovenia unlocked a literal economic superpower, comparative advantage. Because they could simply buy the stuff they were bad at making from their neighbors, Slovenia freed up their entire economy to master exactly what they were naturally great at, like textiles and heavy industry.
Okay, part 5, why Slovenia succeeded and the wealth gap. Now we've got to ask the big question. If the entire country of Yugoslavia was using this exact same free market socialist system, why did Slovenia get so incredibly rich, while other regions, like Serbia and Montenegro, stayed practically trapped in poverty?
It all boils down to a very specific winning formula. First, Slovenia had a highly educated, uncorrupt government. Second, they set up free trade zones that gave foreign investors stability. Third, they had enough baseline wealth to actually fund those social programs. Fourth, and this is absolutely crucial, unlike other socialist regions, they were actually willing to let bad, inefficient companies go bankrupt to make room for new innovation. And finally, they had that direct physical trade access right into wealthy Western Europe.
Because they executed this so well, the wealth inequality across the nation became absolutely staggering. Just look at the numbers. By the end of the 1980s, the average Slovenian was generating around $12,000 a year. That made them more than 6 times wealthier than people living down in Kosovo, all while living under the exact same national flag and the exact same economic umbrella.
Finally, part 6, the end of an era and the transition to capitalism. Because despite all of this completely unprecedented success, literally achieving near first world wealth without capitalism, this golden era of free market socialism eventually hit a sudden and entirely unavoidable brick wall.
It was basically a perfect storm. By the late 1980s, their unifying, charismatic leader, Joseph Tito, died. Without him, the autonomous regions just couldn't agree on how to run the country, which immediately triggered an economic crisis. At the exact same time, the Soviet Union collapsed. That meant Yugoslavia could only seek bailout loans from the West. And the West? They had one very strict demand for that cash. Yugoslavia had to completely abandon socialism and transition immediately to capitalism.
But actually, let's just pause and look at what they pulled off before that transition happened. In just 40 years, Slovenia went from a poverty-stricken farming region to basically knocking on the door of a wealthy powerhouse like France. To put that into perspective, they achieved a pace of wealth generation and individual prosperity that even the modern economic juggernaut of China has not yet matched per capita. Which leaves us with a really profound thought. Was Slovenia's free market socialism purely a one-off historical anomaly? Or, as we look around at the immense economic inequalities and the corporate struggles of our modern world today, Could the actual mechanics of decentralized worker management hold the key to a fairer economic future? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this sparks your curiosity, so keep questioning the systems around you, and I will catch you on